Hello, everyone. There's no real need for me to use the mic, but we are recording, so that is why. Just like to welcome you here this evening to this talk on Waking the Feminists by Lian Bell, who is currently artist in residence. Lian, where do I start? A woman of many talents, set designer. Lian has worked with many of Ireland's major theatre companies, Pan, Broken Talkers, Corn Exchange, and many more. And also then has worked as a producer, programmer, worked on the Dublin Fringe Festival for a number of years as well. And recently then, a couple of years ago, Waking the Feminists, the movement, took over her life. A simple tweet, and it kind of exploded. So she's here to talk to us about that grassroots campaign, and her role in that, and I suppose to bring it up to today as well, and we'll open up then for discussion. Thank you.
Hello. Yeah, like Nora said, I'm going to do a little overview of what Waking the Feminist was, how it came about, and what it's done. It's a lot of ground to cover in about 45 minutes, so apologies if I sort of rattle through things, but at the end we'll have a chance to have a chat, which is always kind of the best part for me. Yeah, so like Nora said, I work freelance in Dublin. I'm a set designer sometimes, and I'm a project manager the rest of the time for cultural events. And in the very end of October, start of November in 2015, Waking the Feminists, or what became known afterwards as Waking the Feminists, began. And I became the campaign director, which I always laugh at because basically I gave myself that title. With everybody else's permission, of course. But it really came out of nowhere. And I'll explain a little bit about that. But basically, we whittled it down after being a little overwhelmed by this groundswell of conversation online and in the media and so on. We decided what we were was a campaign for equality for women in Irish theatre, which was trying to make it as succinct as possible, because for any of you who are interested in feminism or talking about equality, once you start looking at it, you realise it's everywhere. Inequality is everywhere. So it gets quite overwhelming. So it was really important for us to be really specific about what we were doing. And when I say us, it was a group of people who work in the theatre, so we felt like we had the best chance of changing the theatre scene itself. So how it started was from here. So this is Ireland's National Theatre, which is the Abbey Theatre. And at the end of 2015, so the end of October 2015, they announced their programme for 2016, which of course was the centenary for the Rising in Ireland. So it was a big symbolic moment. And the Abbey announced their programme, and I happened to be sitting in my studio on Facebook, doing lots of work on Facebook. And I saw they announced the programme, and I just looked at who was included out of interest, and I started noticing the names, and I started counting them up. And there was 10 productions. Out of the 10 productions, 3 of them were directed by women. And then out of those 10 productions, 1 of them was written by a woman. And at the time, I suppose I was quite tired. I'd had quite a long year, quite a heavy year in terms of work. And I felt like we talk about this all the time. Me and my friends, we talk about it in the pub. We talk about how there's always this imbalance in the world around us. And we complain and we have a drink and then we go about our daily lives. So I just felt in that moment, like, I'm really tired of saying this. I'm just going to have this conversation again in the pub tonight. So actually, I'm just going to say it out loud. And out loud means on Facebook. So this is, well, I'm not going to read you my Facebook post. This is actually the second Facebook post I wrote about it, but I'll read out a couple of small little things because they sort of encapsulate the feeling that I had at the time and the questions that were starting to come up. In an institution whose mission statement's central tenets include reflecting Irish society and placing the artist at the centre of the work, how can this go so wrong in relation to women, which is the tip of the iceberg, and not be addressed in a more open and robust way by them? If the, quote, "I choose the best plays available" reason is so infuriating. Is there really such an imbalance in the quality of male and female writing? Is it down to a male-centric taste of the programmer? And at the least, could that be acknowledged? If the systems in place to generate and produce work to support the theatre's mission statement are failing, don't the systems need to change? And I went on in my small rant to say, I suppose the main question lies in what the National Theatre is for and what we want it to do for us. Maybe that's the next can of worms. I'm asking these because I'm tired of talking about this kind of thing with my peers and nothing real happening. Yes, I'm probably being naive. Yes, some people will be rolling their eyes and never get to this part of the post, but I'd prefer to start asking stupid questions out loud than keep on bloody talking about the Abbey in the privacy of a bar or an office. So that was me just venting, really, on Facebook. And it touched a nerve. And just this avalanche of comments and opinions and observations and stories and testimonies started coming up. First on Facebook, and then we moved it to Twitter, because if anybody doesn't use Twitter and Facebook, Twitter feels a little bit more public. So I started taking photographs of taking screenshots of everybody's comments and bringing them across to Twitter and putting them there. And I needed a hashtag, because that's a way of grouping all those comments together. And I completely stole one, which was this young director I know called Maeve Stone. The Abbey's programme was called Waking the Nation, so people started taking the piss out of that very quickly. So there was lots of comments like waking half the nation. And Maeve wrote Waking the Feminists, and I was sitting there going, I need a hashtag. Oh, hashtag Waking the Feminists, great. And that was it. That was the extent of my thinking. And then later on, somebody said to me, oh, WTF. Which, if you don't know, also means what the fuck. Like, what the fuck? Which I didn't think about at all. So the conversation grew online. There was a kind of a confluence of events that happened. One of them was the director of the Abbey Theatre was about to go on holiday. He'd launched the programme and then was going to leave the country, basically. But because there was this big furore online, he agreed very ill-advisedly to have a conversation on Twitter about it. And he came out with 2 cracking tweets, which I don't and haven't programmed plays or productions on a gender basis. I took decisions based on who I admired and wanted to work with. And the other one was, also sometimes plays and ideas that we've commissioned by and about women just don't work out. This has happened, them the breaks. So that became like, it was like throwing petrol on a fire. Like he tweeted these, he turned off his phone and he went on holiday for 5 days, which meant that the Abbey, Theatre didn't have somebody who could represent what they were going to say. So the Abbey stayed completely quiet, which gave us as a community 5 days of growing confidence and being able to write things online. So I've just picked out a few small little snippets of the kind of thing people were talking about and saying. So this is Róisín Gowan, who is a extraordinary freelance curator in Ireland. So one of the things she mentioned was, I can't say how relieved I am that Waking the Feminists has finally given voice to the experiences of so many women in Irish theatre, including myself. Thank God we are finally talking about this. Now, it's funny I read this and I'm like, yeah, whatever. But at the time, Waking the Feminists, this kind of conversation just did not happen. Like, there had not been a conversation about gender in Irish theatre at this kind of level with this kind of group of people. So there was a real sense of release, I think, for a lot of people. Anne Clark, who's Ireland's leading independent producer and is absolutely extraordinary. She's a firebomb. It took a long time before it wasn't simply assumed that by virtue of being a woman, I would take the minutes at the meetings. You know, I think a lot of us have experienced that in the past. And this is another one from a woman called Louise Drum. My theatre career came to an abrupt end 14 years ago as the result of misogyny. I fought on for a few years, but even with the Equality Authority involved, I just couldn't keep going. I left the country in anger and shame and privately had a minor breakdown. Was I a good theatre director? Yes. As good as my male contemporaries? Yes. I hope that this groundswell of outrage will change it for others. So there was this incredibly personal outpouring, I suppose, of personal stories. One of the things that became clear was we didn't, as a community, we didn't have the statistics to back up what we were saying, other than being able to point out, say, in the Abbey's programme, that there was only one female writer out of 10. So a lot of this conversation was based on feelings and experiences, but which I think I was afraid would be easily dismissed, because sometimes they can be sort of seen as the less powerful argument. But because there was such a volume of them, it became impossible to dismiss what was going on. So this kind of conversation was happening on social media. The other thing that was happening on social media was a group, all of us started to essentially track down famous people and get them to take photographs of themselves supporting Waking the Feminists. So we had people like Saoirse Ronan, who I think is currently nominated for an Oscar again. Third time. There you go. Gabriel Byrne, these are just a little selection. Martha Plimpton, who's amazing. Deborah Messing, who, if anybody ever watched Will and Grace, will know is amazing. Wim Wenders, which it took me, where's Audrey? There we are. So that's Audrey. This came up on Twitter and I was just like, how on earth did Wim Wenders find out about this? And I met Audrey about 6 months or a year later, and she told me that she saw him at a film festival and accosted him. Good for her. And here's a few more. So people like Emma Donoghue, the writer, Nicole Kidman actually is in there, but it's a terrible photograph, unfortunately. Anyway, lots of people. And then the one that kind of got us the most media attention was this one with Meryl Streep and Christine Baranski. The woman on the left is an Irish playwright who lives in New York, and she saw Meryl at an event and basically went up to her and explained the whole thing. And to be fair, Meryl Streep had already heard of Waking the Feminists, so I was delighted. But this kind of thing was the amount of power that you get from this, or the amount of attention you get from the media, is extraordinary. So, you know, up until this photograph, maybe the Irish Times was talking about it. So I suppose seen as a slightly highbrow conversation. But as soon as Meryl Streep got involved, tabloids were writing about it, which was great because it meant it spread what we were saying. And just to give you a sense of the timeline, so it all happened incredibly quickly. So the first Thursday, the program was announced and I wrote my Facebook post. The next week it was like, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like I accidentally stood on board a truck that was traveling at 120 miles an hour, and I was just about holding on. So I was in my pajamas every day on my laptop for about 14 hours a day, eating one bowl of muesli for a week on my own. And the following Thursday was the first time we had a meeting with a group of people who work in theatre. So people, I suppose, many of them at high levels, running organisations, running theatre companies, but then a lot of independent artists and producers and so on. So that was the following Thursday. And at that time, I'd already written to the Abbey saying I wanted the use of the theatre, of the venue, and they'd said yes. So we met to start planning what we were going to do. And the following Thursday, we had a massive event in the Abbey Theatre, which the Abbey is about 430, I think, seats. And we announced we were going to put the tickets online at a specific time. And when we put them online, they were gone in less than 7 minutes. So there was really huge attention on this. And there was also, we live streamed it. We had people watching all over the world. Like we were able to see people in Australia, in Buenos Aires, in Canada, in America. watching it. A lot of Irish expats, obviously, but other people as well. So just to give you a flavour of what the event was like, hopefully this video works. Oh, no, there's no sound. Le son, ça marche? Oui? Non.
I really think that the time has come for everybody to look and examine and ask the question, why is it that so many women artists, creative women in the theatre, feel marginalised and excluded?
I hope that it will spark a lot of conversations and a lot of organisations looking to the way they practice and changing the way they practice. I hope it's the start of that.
An amazing buzz, isn't there? Like, and some incredible women here. Like, the faces. There's just really, really wonderful people all supporting each other.
It's a conversation we've all been having in private and smaller sectors, trying to make smaller change, and now finally it's reached a very big public forum, and I think there's a lot of exciting things to come.
Yeah, it's just supporting women in theatre and women in the industry in general, and it's just amazing when everybody comes together. You realise that the kind of strength that's here.
A great result today will be equal access to storytelling in all our theatres, and that's what's going to happen because everybody wants it. It's the right time now.
I have never been directed by a woman in 27 years. I have done one play by a woman, a French woman, that was adapted by a man. Other than that, zero. I have never worked with a female sound designer. I have worked with one lighting designer that was female. I have worked with one lighting technician. No sound technicians, ever. I have worked on so many productions. Once I've worked with a male stage manager. Other than that, they're all female. Their statistics, they're just bald facts. How much talent have we lost to chauvinism? How much talent have we lost to sexism? Why were we offered a debate? Why aren't we being offered an apology? Because if any institution, let alone a national theatre, something that's funded by the public, anything was homophobic or racist, they'd be shot down. But sexism is still being considered a petty crime.
We call on the Abbey as our national theatre to lead the way in establishing equality for women artists. Our 3 campaign objectives are a sustained policy for inclusion with an action plan and measurable results, equal championing and advancement of women artists, and economic parity for all working in the theatre. Thank you. This is the embarrassing dancing bit. Okay. But you get a sense of the atmosphere that was happening there. Like, it was one of the most electric days, I think, of all of our lives. There was a real sense that people had taken control of their national theatre again. Oh, no, we don't want to see it again. We want to go to the next slide. If the next slide works. Okay, so yeah, at the same time we held a press call and invited any women who wanted to come along, who work in the theatre, to meet us outside the Abbey and take this photograph. And all of this happened in a week. You know, all of this preparation to make this event happened in a week. And what was extraordinary was there was an amazing group of people, a lot of whom I hadn't worked with before, I didn't know before, who all took responsibility for one area. They decided, I want to do this, and just went and did it. And it all came together. So, for example, I still don't even really know who asked for this banner to be made. I know that on the day I was told there's going to be a banner, and then there was no banner, and then I was told, it's okay, Molly is coming on her bike with the banner. And I was like, okay, I don't know who Molly is. And then finally, this banner got unrolled, and there was, you know, it's amazing. It's kind of iconic now. It's actually been used in a theatre production since the production of the train. But Molly turns out to be she was a final year theatre student. Somebody had rung her and said, could you please make a banner? And she and her friends, I don't know if they probably paid for the fabric, and I don't know. They decided this is important, that they wanted to make it. So thank God they did. At the same time, the very same day, what started happening to me was having to speak publicly. That clip where I'm speaking on the Abbey stage, that was the first time I was on the Abbey stage. Well, I was on for a little rehearsal earlier that day. But I'm somebody who works backstage. I was never a performer. I've never really been interested in being out front. But suddenly I became the person that the media wanted to ask questions of, because they really need a single face. You know, I kept trying to push other people on to talk instead of me, and they kept saying, no, you know, Lian Bell, she's the one we know the name of. And so I had to step up very quickly and learn how to speak publicly. So do this kind of thing, but then also talk to the media. And I counted up at the event itself, there was 4 film crews from the 4 major TV stations really in Ireland. But then I counted up at the end of the year all the media coverage that we had. I don't even know how many articles or how many items, but there were 90 outlets. So I count the Irish Times as one of those outlets, and we were in the Irish Times 17 times in that year. But these were news stations in Ireland, newspapers in Canada, in the States, in England, in Poland, in France. So the media really reacted very positively and were really supportive of what was going on, thank God. So straight after that event, this is the day of that event, and this is it's a little unfair to say this is the team because there's loads of people missing, but this is a lot of the group of people who helped make that event happen. So it's everything from independent producers, actors, writers, people who run organizations, people who work in organizations. Oh, sorry, that's going on by itself. And we got together and decided that we wanted to use the energy that had been created from this event, and we decided to make a campaign for a year. And this is when we managed to decide it was about women in Irish theatre. And we, to kind of concisely say what we did for the whole year, we decided the thing that we could do, or the thing that would make most sense, because we had a finite amount of time. We were all working as volunteers. Most people were also working their own jobs. So we only had a small amount of time and a small amount a small amount of energy, and we realized what we needed to do was use that to our greatest advantage. So we needed to talk to the people who had the most power, basically, which are the boards of the organizations and people like the Arts Council and later on the Department of Arts. But as you can sort of tell from the atmosphere of the event, it very quickly moved on from just talking about the Abbey. At the start it was all talking about the National Theatre, but as the stories came out it was very clear that these kind of problems were happening across all of Irish theatre really, and not just Irish theatre, if you look at everything really, film, media and so on. So we started meeting all of the boards of the major theatre organisations, and talking to the boards and directors about what they can do, about what their how they can put policy in place. And all of this was totally new to me, completely new. And for me, when someone started talking about policy, I just was like, I don't even really know what that means, and it sounds really boring. And I've come to really love policy now. Policy basically is setting in stone the intention of the organisation. So it's the organisation putting their voice forward and saying, this is what we believe in, and this is what we're going to try and do. Obviously, there have to be practical steps to achieve those, but it's like a public declaration of your beliefs. So it was really important for us to make sure that policy was put in place in all of the big organizations. Also partly because I was a little afraid that with this big emotional roller coaster that we were all on, that it was going to be tangible for a year maybe, and then, you know, a couple of years would pass, a director would leave an organization, that kind of memory would fade, and we'd just go back to where we were. So for me, it was really important. We kept talking about changing the DNA of the organizations. I'm doing that by changing the policy. So we started meeting all of these, the top funded theatre organizations, basically. And we met with the Arts Council. We continued a big campaign on social media, and going and doing lots of talks and so on. What else did we do? We started hosting. We realized we couldn't do everything, and we also were quite Dublin based. And I was aware that if we started holding events all the time, that would take up a lot of our energy, but also there would only be a certain amount of people who could go to them. So it was really important for me to make sure that individuals felt that they were part of it, that they had agency in it. So we started doing what we called open source events, where basically I would put out a post on Facebook online saying, for example, 6th of January, which is Women's Christmas in Ireland, Nulligan that anybody who wanted could just host an event and host a Waking the Feminist event. And on the 6th of January 2016, there were 14 events, I think, in all across Ireland, New York, Dublin obviously, London, and I think one in Australia. And they were everything from, there was a woman on Inisheer who opened her house to have a cup of tea with anyone who wanted to come in and talk about feminism, which I just love, to like a big kind of event in Dublin with lots of readings and poetry and music and performance. So it was really up to whoever wanted to organise it, who wanted to take on that responsibility, who wanted to be part of it, and all we did was say yes. And that's incredibly powerful. It gives people a lot of courage, and it gives them agency. It makes them part of what's going on. So that was very important for us. Learning, I suppose, one of the biggest things that happened for me personally during the year was just learning all about this. I was a feminist. I would have said I was a feminist before the campaign, but I don't know if I could even really describe what that was, and I don't know if I could have described what sexism was really. And so it was a huge learning opportunity for me to just start to understand the mechanisms of how patriarchy controls a lot of our life. And one of the things that I learned a lot about was unconscious bias, which is, I won't go into too much detail here, but it's basically about how our brains are, if you think of a computer, our brains are programmed in certain ways that we don't even realize they are programmed. So our choices and our favoritism is skewed in some way, and this is all of us. I think one of the great things about talking about unconscious bias is that it's not just about pointing at the man in the room and saying, it's your fault and you're doing it wrong. The point is, it's actually all of us. It's part of all of us, and we all have to take responsibility, and we all have to learn, and we all have to watch ourselves. The trick is to actually want to do that, which not everybody does, surprisingly enough. The other thing that happened for us was awards. So we got lots of awards, which was great, including there's an organisation called the Lily Awards in New York. We got the first ever International Lily Award, which was given to us by Gloria Steinem, who is there. And that's the woman who tracked down Meryl Streep, you might remember. So she got to meet the cool women. Damn her. And again, that was, it's great. It makes you feel wonderful when you get an award, but the great thing it does is that it validates what you're doing in the eyes of other people. So for example, this, that tweet up there, is from Katrina Perry, who was the US correspondent for RTE. So we were on the RTE news, we were on national news again because we won this award. And again, it just kept that conversation going, and it made people feel like what we were doing was real and tangible. So, how am I doing for time? Okay, not too bad. I'll rattle through the last little bit. So, things changed quite quickly because we only had 1 year of this campaign. One of the first things that changed, which was great, was the National Theatre, the Abbey, spent a lot of time, their board spent a lot of time and energy looking at the gender issues inside the organisation and coming up with a series of recommendations that are now set as part of the company's structure, called their guiding principles, and they're on their website. This is their website. But the kind of things that they said are, the board has to be gender equal, gender equality or equality has to be on at every single board meeting. So, for example, at every board meeting you talk about the budget, but they also now have to talk about gender and how the balance is going across the organisations at every meeting. But that also the artistic programme has to be balanced over 5 years. So that's from being kind of the scapegoat at the beginning, they turned around in, I think, less than 6 months and produced these guiding principles, which have actually put them at the forefront of national theatres in the world. All of the top theatre organisations in Ireland, the top funded ones, so the Abbey, the Gate, Druid Theatre Company, Dublin Theatre Festival, Dublin Fringe Festival, Project Arts Centre and Rough Magic Theatre Company, which are kind of the top funded ones, were at an event that we organised in March where they all stood up and said that they recognised it was a problem and they were committed to doing something about it, which was in some cases easier to get them to do than others. Some people were happier to do that than others, but we managed to do it. And once they said it publicly, it meant that they were a bit more accountable. One of the big things that happened for us was getting money from the Arts Council to commission some research, because like I said earlier, there was just no statistics. So we, thankfully, these amazing academics who all became part of Waking the Feminists decided they wanted to do a research project. So they published this in June last year, and it's 10 years of the 10 top funded theatre organisations, just to look at their statistics. And I won't go into detail. If anybody is interested, it is on our website. We have a research section on our website, so you can download the report for free. But essentially it kind of reassured us in that everything that we thought was correct, but actually probably a bit worse. And like I said, I won't go into it in detail, but so for example, in the 10 years, so it's from 2005 to 2000, let me get this right, it's from 2006 to 2015, there were 20% of directors in the National Theatre were female, and only 17% of writers were female. Worst still, unfortunately, the Gate, and I have to say I'm not that surprised. So the Gate Theatre is the next highest funded theatre in Ireland. 8% in 10 years of directors were women, and 6% of writers were women. Like, once you see it like this, it's really, really, really hard to dismiss. So we were incredibly proud of having gotten all that together, because it did stop people from, it stopped it being a dismissible thing. The other kind of thing that it showed up was that it tended to be the companies with more funding were less equal, and the smaller independent companies that had less funding tended to be more equitable. It also showed up things like there are roles that are very gendered. So for example, sound design, there's a tiny amount of sound designers, I don't think it's on that thing now, who are female. It's something like 1%, I think, female, or 2%. And the opposite almost exactly with costume designers. it started a big debate as well then about costume design, because costume design is the lower paid design role when you're working on a production in Ireland. So there was a lot of debate of, is it lower paid because it's seen traditionally as a woman's job? And some organisations have already started to try and change their fee structures around that. Kind of lash through these. There's so much to talk about. So what happened after the year or during the year? There's been an absolute sea change in the way that we talk about gender in theatre. And I think across not just theatre, but across all of the arts in Ireland, it's become a very normal conversation to have, where in the past it just wasn't. It wasn't seen as important, I think. So individuals talk more openly about it, but also organisations, I think, know that people are going to call them out if they don't keep a check on their own balance, keep a check on their own programming. So programmers really can't ignore gender anymore. They have to look at their program and look at it through the lens of how many men artists are going to be in the program versus how many female artists are going to be in the program. There's still a media focus on all of this, like it's still in the newspaper regularly. It's kind of, Waking the Feminist as a term has kind of become part of our lexicon when we talk about culture and women in Irish culture, which is really extraordinary. There has been a really visible shift in the programming of the big theatre companies. So the Abbey Theatre, both the Abbey Theatre and the Gate Theatre changed directors in the last year. The Gate is now run by a woman for the first time ever, which, while I can't say was down to Waking the Feminists, I do feel like there was a bit of influence there, which is great. But both of their programs have really changed. Like if you look at you can count them now and not feel ashamed, which is a start. We've got a couple of the core team members, the Waking the Feminist team members. One is now on the Abbey, on the Abbey board, and the other one is in the Arts Council itself. So in terms of getting people placed in key positions, that was an amazing thing to have happen. Obviously, they're amazing people, not just for Waking the Feminists, but because they have that ethos behind them, it means that they're now pushing that agenda within the organisations. So, for example, the Arts Council is now going to start asking all arts organisations, not just theatre organisations, but asking all of them, when they apply for funding, that they have to have a gender equality or a gender policy in place. At the moment, they ask, like if you're working with children, they ask you for a child protection policy. So it's not a difficult thing to ask for. So now they're going to ask for a gender policy from all the arts organisations. I'm part of what's called the Gender Equality Policy Working Group, which is a lot of the major theatre organisations like the Gate, Rough Magic, the Lear Academy, which is sort of the leading training course in Ireland for theatre professionals. They're all developing their own policies and they're all investigating their own structures and changing them. And we're doing it together. That was the main thing. Rather than everybody going and trying to do it themselves, we wanted to meet together and think about the whole industry as an ecosystem, so that we try to not let there be too many gaps between in a person's trajectory in life and in their career, that there will be protection for them throughout, or support for them throughout their career. At the same time, the Minister for the Arts at the time, she's Heather Humphreys, she's now not the Minister for the Arts anymore, but she contacted we talked to her and she went and contacted all of the national cultural institutions, which are things like the National Gallery, the National Library, the National Concert Hall, the Crawford, the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and so on. All the big cultural organisations who kind of define what Irish culture is in many ways. They are the biggest arbiters of Irish cultural taste in some ways. So she asked all of them to put gender policies in place. Again, it sounds a little bit dry, but what it means is that hopefully all of this gets embedded into the organisation itself. We've also had a really strong ripple effect outside of the theatre. There's been a lot of other groups that have started up as a kind of having been inspired by Waking the Feminists. So there's one group that's called MAMS, M-A-M-S, which is Mothers, Artists, Makers, because one of the big conversations that kept coming up was about parenthood and the difficulty of being a mother when you're working in the theatre. And they're now all across the country meeting each other and starting to lobby their local arts centres and their local organisations. And I suppose just being a bit of a support to each other, where they wouldn't have had that kind of support before. There's a group called Sounding the Feminists, which is, I suppose, women working in music as composers and mostly as composers, but also as musicians, who are trying to lobby to make sure that women composers get more work seen on the national stage. There's Waking the Media, which is a group of, it's a woman called Una Mullally who works for the Irish Times, who's been starting to assemble women who work across the media to talk to each other about their own problems. I suppose also specifically in the wake of the Me Too movement, where we were starting to talk about harassment and bullying. And there's a Waking the Feminists Northern Ireland group who grew out of the open source event that was run up in Belfast, and they've done things like they're continuing to meet. They've done things like they've managed to get a local agent banned because he had a history of sexual harassment of the actresses that he was working with. So they've managed to go the legal route and get him banned from running an agency in Northern Ireland for the next 10 years. So there's all these very practical things that are happening, but I've got nothing to do with them. People are just taking the ball and running in whatever direction they wanted. It started, Waking the Feminists itself is now, like I said, it's entered the lexicon of the language, but it's also entering, I suppose, the history of the country. I was recently asked to contribute to this, which is the book commissioned by the state that outlines everything that happened in the centenary last year. So it's about that thick. And it's a beautiful publication, but it's in every library now around the country. It's the thing that documents what happened during the centenary commemorations. Waking the Feminists has about 6 pages in there between text and photographs. So we're part of the history of the state now, which is amazing. And just one last little plug. This is actually being published today. And it's a book by a small independent press in Dublin who have written this book for, I suppose, young adults and teenagers. And there's a section in it about Waking the Feminists. So it's just become part of, I suppose, the background, the fabric of women's lives in Ireland. And yeah, last week I was reading an article that was an interview by with Dervla Crotty, who's an extraordinary Irish actress. And she said this, so I thought it'd be a good thing to end on. Perhaps the most profound impact will be in women's perception of their own limitless potential and the absolute justification of their presence in all areas and the naturalness of that, the absolute uncompromising rightness of that. So that's Dervla. Thank you.